The world watched in astonishment. Trump and Putin, two figures who had dominated global headlines for years, were on the phone. The topic: ending the war in Ukraine, a war that had ravaged the country, displaced millions, and threatened to escalate into a wider conflict. The Kremlin spoke of addressing root causes, a chilling echo of history's darkest chapters. Comparisons to the appeasement of Hitler in the 1930s were inevitable. Was history repeating itself? The possibility of a face-to-face meeting loomed. Saudi Arabia, a neutral ground, was floated as a potential location, but a key question remained unanswered. Would Zelensky, the embattled leader of Ukraine, be present, or would his fate be decided without him? The specter of a divided Ukraine, reminiscent of post-World War II Germany, hung heavy in the air. Would this be the price of peace? Adding to the tension, the United States seemed to be dictating terms. NATO membership for Ukraine? Unrealistic, declared Washington. The return of Crimea and all territories seized by Russia since 2014? Equally improbable. Instead, the onus of guaranteeing Ukraine's future security would fall on Europe. The United States, it seemed, was washing its hands of the crisis it had played a significant role in creating. The call sent shockwaves across Europe. From London to Paris, Berlin to Warsaw, leaders expressed deep concern about being sidelined. The United Kingdom, Germany, France, Poland, Italy, Spain, and the European Union all insisted that Ukraine and Europe must be central to any negotiations. The message was clear: Europe would not be a bystander in its own backyard. The stakes were too high, but would their voices be heard? For Putin, the call was a victory, at least optically. Despite early setbacks in Ukraine, he had managed to secure a direct line to the White House. This after years of sanctions and international condemnation. The Russian markets reacted euphorically. The ruble surged. Hope, it seemed, was in the air. Hope that sanctions would be lifted. Hope that Russia would emerge from the crisis stronger, its sphere of influence expanded. But in Ukraine, the mood was grim. Zelensky, facing pressure from all sides, found himself in an impossible position. He had to negotiate with a man who had invaded his country, who had questioned his legitimacy, who had called for his removal. And he had to do it with the knowledge that his most powerful ally, the United States, was no longer fully in his corner. Adding to Zelensky's woes, the United States seemed more interested in extracting concessions from Ukraine than pressuring Russia. Demands for $500 billion in Ukrainian mineral rights were made. The exemption from US steel tariffs, a lifeline for the Ukrainian economy, was abruptly cancelled. It was a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play. Meanwhile, China, the rising superpower, watched with keen interest. Beijing welcomed the talks and pledged a constructive role in peace efforts. It was a carefully worded statement, open to interpretation. Was China positioning itself as a mediator, or was it seeking to exploit the situation to further its own interests? The answer, like so much else in this unfolding drama, remained shrouded in uncertainty. Across the Atlantic, a flurry of diplomatic activity was underway. US Defense Secretary Hegseth was dispatched to NATO headquarters in Brussels, a show of solidarity with America's European allies. Vice President Vance prepared to meet Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference, a high-profile opportunity to assess the situation firsthand. And Special Envoy Keith Kellogg embarked on a whirlwind tour of Germany and Ukraine, tasked with conveying the US position and gauging the mood on the ground. The United States, despite its apparent disengagement, was still very much involved, but the nature of its involvement had shifted. No longer was it the unwavering supporter of Ukrainian sovereignty. Instead, it seemed to be adopting a more transactional approach, prioritizing its own interests over those of its allies. In a move seemingly unconnected to the Ukraine crisis, the United States and Russia conducted a prisoner swap. Teacher Mark Fogel, detained in Russia on drug charges, was exchanged for cybercriminal Alexander Vinnik, held in the United States. The swap, facilitated by Saudi Arabia, was a rare moment of cooperation between the two adversaries. But it also served as a reminder of the high-stakes gamesmanship that continued to define the relationship. The world watched, holding its breath. Would the Trump-Putin call be a turning point in the Ukraine crisis? Would it lead to a lasting peace? Or would it merely pave the way for a new era of instability and uncertainty? The answers to these questions would have profound implications, not just for Ukraine and Europe, but for the entire international order. The situation in Ukraine remained precarious, a tinderbox in a volatile world. The Trump-Putin call, while raising hopes for a negotiated settlement, also underscored the deep divisions and conflicting interests at play. The path to peace, if it existed at all, was fraught with peril. The outcome of the crisis would hinge on a multitude of factors: the willingness of all sides to compromise, the ability of the international community to present a united front, and perhaps, most importantly, the calculations of the two men at the center of it all, Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. The stakes could not be higher. For Ukraine, it was a fight for survival, for its very existence as a sovereign nation. For Russia, it was a test of its resurgent power, its determination to reassert its dominance in its near abroad. And for the United States and its European allies, It was a defining moment, a test of their commitment to the principles of democracy, sovereignty, and the rule of law. The world watched and waited, hoping against hope that wisdom would prevail, that peace would triumph. But in the back of everyone's minds, a chilling thought lingered. What would be the price of that peace, and who would ultimately pay it? The answer, like the future of Ukraine itself, remained tantalizingly out of reach.